of the rights of person with disabilities, which is the RPWD Act of 2016, because it has a direct bearing on how organizations and corporates approach the whole concept of disability inclusion as well as inclusion transformation within their organization. Some of the things, and before I introduce my very, very eminent and august guest today, uh, a couple of things that I would like to bring to fore as far as what the session will enable as it culminates is essentially look at areas of focus and the critical roles that legal frameworks play in fostering an inclusive workplace, ensuring, therefore, that organizations not only meet their statutory obligations, but also champion the rights and dignity of persons with disabilities. So that's one very, very important aspect and pillar that we're certainly, Amar and I are going to be touching upon. Um, and if, to bring this to a fairly short end so that we can get on with the conversation with Amar, is that our discussion today is envisaged to provide very prescriptive insights into the practical implications of the RPWD Act of 2016 for each of you who represent a certain organization or a corporate, thereby somewhere offering you the guidance on navigating compliance while driving meaningful change within your organization, as well as foster the concept of inclusive thought at a societal level. So without further ado, and to make the most of the 60 odd minutes that we have, please put your hands together to welcome none other than Amar Jain, who's a corporate lawyer and accessibility professional. Amar, welcome. Absolute delight that you could join us today.
Thank you, Arjun, and good evening, everybody.
Lovely. Amar, we've got an interesting, at least 45 odd minutes ahead, where I think I will monopolize the time that we have with you before we throw it open for questions to the larger audience. So Amar, I'm going to, and before I jump into the questions, a couple of things really is that we've looked at Sarasi, we've looked at various areas that we've worked in terms of the RPWD Act and its implications and the statutory obligations, obviously, for corporates. And we've kind of broken this entire conversation up into a few segments, really, for want of a better term. The first, of course, is the most important one, which is the compliance by itself and its legal ramifications. I've got a few questions there. Then again is a very, very important aspect that we've seen organizations talk about and be very inquisitive about, which is the whole concept of reasonable accommodations by corporates for persons with disabilities. So a few questions there from our end also. Then, of course, the whole concept of how should organizations leverage nuances of the RPWD Act and focus on policy and its implementation. And perhaps last but not the least, we'll focus also on the whole concept of third-party vendors and the associated compliance that comes along with it. So if that seems just about okay with you, we'll jump into it right away.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So my first question really, and I think something that's been beguiling all of us in many, many aspects is we've all gone through the RPWD Act of 2016 in many, many ways. We've read through it. But what, according to you, Amar, and in your spectrum of understanding, are the potential legal consequences for corporations that perhaps fail to comply with the disability inclusion regulations? And in its entirety, how can therefore organizations proactively mitigate these risks? And there are quite a few risks. So this is really a two-parter. I know it's complex, but if you could take a stab at this.
Sure. So, the very first thing that I wanted to set out here is that while compliances look like a fearful tool to generate a perception, whether positive or negative, depending on how we look at it, but honestly, compliance enables any sort of compliance which is put into any statutory obligation, whether for persons with disabilities or for any other section, enables that section's better representation into the system and enables that section to come into and be part of the system. So compliance, if we look at it in its positive way, it actually drives meaningful change and it is actually intended to bring out positive impacts in times to come.
Okay.
So when we approach compliances, we should not approach it from a mindset of fearfulness,
All
or
right.
the fear factor of compliance should not be the part of why we should observe the compliance as an organization. Now, to answer questions, what are the consequences or what are the ramifications and what are the risk mitigation measures? Uh, by and large, depending on the compliances, the ramifications could be different.
All right.
But broadly, some common ramifications would be one is there is a clause for imposition of penalty under Section 89, and the maximum penalty that can be imposed under the law is 5 lakh rupees. There are certain provisions under the law which have criminal angle to it as well, which have provisions for imprisonment. For instance, if somebody fraudulently uses disability to avail any disability specific benefits, or if somebody publicly insults persons with disability, or if there is any violence being committed against persons with disabilities,
All right.
right? There are also provisions for companies where officers in default, so let's say if the MD of the company is aware that there is a disability law violation which is happening, or any rights of persons with disabilities are violated, and despite that fails to take preventive measures, and then there are provisions where the person can be held up liable, held up for both financial and criminal consequences.
Fundamentally, willful negligence.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Amar, with your permission, before you expand on this, I just want to take a step back. And I love what you said. You spoke about Section 89 penalty, both pecuniary and financial, as well as criminal and otherwise. When you look at corporate India, in many ways, I think uh, most folks do tend to be overcautious when understanding and implementing the import of the RPWD Act and integrating them into their policies. From a corporate India point of view, I dare say physical violence or anything fairly extreme may be negated to a certain extent. And I
Right.
think a lot of, well, I wouldn't say a lot of, but many of the infringement, if I may be allowed to use that term loosely, may happen on the borderline of culture, integration, and people and processes.
Absolutely.
So now, how do you kind of look at the whole implication and the ramifications of the RPWD Act in that sense?
Absolutely. So, and in fact, this is what I was also about to say, that, while some of these compliances or some of these consequences may look not so much relevant to corporate India, but in a corporate setup, really, the kind of violations that you will see are more around either discrimination, whether
Indeed.
direct or indirect, right? Could be around denial of equal opportunities. Again, could be direct or could be indirect. Could be around POSH and disability. Again, that's a very nuanced subject, and
Yeah,
and
that's quite an
calls
intersectionality of sorts.
yeah, and calls for a separate webinar, in fact, if I may say so. So from that perspective, just give you a couple of examples. Let's say you hire an employee and you say that the cost of assistive technology, while we'll pay initially, but we'll recover it from your salary,
All right.
right? A very specific instance.
Indeed.
Then, for example, some corporates, and that's a preference. Obviously, we don't put it on paper, but informally, you would have heard it as part of employment journeys. That sometimes people say, "Oh, we want to hire people with disability, but somebody who has a lesser disability, for example,
Indeed so.
or
Indeed so.
or somebody who belongs to XYZ category or not ABC category."
Fair.
Right now, those are the kind of things that should ring a bell within the corporate setup.
Interesting.
Third thing, for example, could be that while we have equal opportunity policy, but over a consistent period of years, we continue to say that, oh, we tried finding out the right talent set, but we just couldn't find, and hence we don't have anybody with a disability employed into our organization. So, on the face of it, if you look at it, it's not a non-compliance.
Indeed.
And honestly, we as lawyers even know how to make something compliant despite being non-compliant, unless it is challenged. And that's the beauty of the profession.
Quite true. Quite true.
So from that perspective, I think what we need to really look at it is the intent. See, ultimately, this is a socially beneficial legislation.
Indeed.
Whenever it is challenged and whenever it is brought to a court of law, court is going to look at it from a beneficial angle, not from a perspective of the strict letter of the law that is prescribed here. So we should give it wide purport, but of course not so as to dilute the effectiveness of the law or to overstretch the effectiveness of the law.
That's actually brilliantly put. Therefore, my question to you is, what is your guidance to organizations as they set about? And I know, and I kind of configured this that we would jump a few segments here and there because there would be fairly interesting questions that would pop
Yeah.
up as a result of a lot of what you're articulating in such supreme measure. Is really, therefore, what is your guidance to organizations that are looking to navigate the RPWD Act and its purport and integrate them into policies and implementation within the organization? Like, is there a specific manner in which organizations could approach the whole nuance, or
So,
is it that it's a case by case kind of a situation?
so Arjun, one broad thing that I've observed ever since RPWD came into force and ever since industry started taking proactive measures for policy formulation. In many companies, I have seen that while people have formulated policies, but those are fairly standardized templates that people have adopted, right?
Hmm.
Without applying, if I'm, and that's a bold statement to make, but without applying their minds to it, in the sense that the law requires you to adopt equal opportunity policy, fine, we adopted equal opportunity policy. But we didn't think about a couple of angles that are important for us to say that we are equal opportunity provider. So some instances, for example, could be, have we really done functional role-based analysis? Right?
Interesting.
If we say that, oh, we do not provide a security guard job or a receptionist job to a blind person, have we really done a functional analysis as to what are the barriers that might come in way of a person with blindness to be able to perform this role, and what potential solutions exist, and whether those solutions are viable for us as an organization and not, and if not, then what are the objective parameters basis which we say that this is not viable. Cost, of course, is I would say all in sundry factor for everything, right? But
True.
cost just can't be alone. There has to be some other factors. There have to be more than cost, which meets the eye, and then we decide that, oh, this is viable and this is not viable. If not viable, what are the proactive measures we can take to mitigate those circumstances, right? Is there something in our hand? Is there a tool or technology or an infrastructure or anything that we're using, which if we kind of make it more accessible, or if we modify to a certain extent to meet that person's need, then can we enable the person to perform better? Are there enough financial provisions in place? It is one thing to say, oh, we'll provide you whatever you need as part of equal opportunity policy. But when a candidate goes and puts a request for an assistive technology which costs perhaps a lakh or more, then do we have a centralized budget or any part of financial resources are allocated for us to be able to kind of meet those needs?
So
And
true.
is the processes that we formulate, are those designed in a manner where the candidate is required to run from post to pillar to get it, or is there a system in place where it is very system driven, where let's say a case manager is assigned, or a support portal provision where you could simply go and log in the request and the relevant departments can look into it and can accordingly deal with the request? Are there SLAs in place for things that we take up? uh, when we deal with third parties, for instance, do we have enough in our vendor contracts to ensure that wherever there is disability non-compliance, are we able to cater to those requirements? So many of those factors come into picture.
It's actually very interesting that you say that, and I couldn't agree more. But I had a personal question that I want to kind of bring in as a supplementary and kind of insert this into this conversation. Uh, in many ways, when we look at the RPWD Act, its compliance areas, its ramifications, the act by itself, a general tendency, Amar, is to look at the obvious disabilities.
Hmm,
You, for example, spoke about vision impairment. We
hmm,
could look at orthopedic impairment and similar ones. There's a huge invisible disability set of disabilities that
yes.
exist How, in your view, does the RPWD Act kind of help organizations navigate that, which
Sure.
is in many ways the unknown?
Absolutely. Neurodiversity actually has become a new game, to be honest. Many people don't even understand the types of invisible disabilities that exist and the
Perhaps.
types of complications that they have associated with it.
Quite
So,
true.
for, one specific recommendation that I always give corporates is that have specific workshops where experiential sessions are conducted. Tell you very basic activities. So, for example, people with multiple sclerosis experience many a times sense problem with their sense making, not intellectually but otherwise. Their physical senses go numb many a times. So, for example, their sense of touch might go numb, etc. Now, how do you, or they feel fatigue, they feel pain, they feel irritation, they feel low energy in the body. How would you explain this to a layman, right? A couple of activities that we do, for example, ice bucket challenge. So we say you take a bucket of ice and hold the ice cube in your hand to the extent you can. So let's say 10 minutes, 12 minutes. After 12 minutes, you will feel there is a numbness in your hands.
Of course.
That's the way to experience some of these things. So invisible disability honestly is more about experiencing those kind of concepts and then realizing what it entails and what kind of accommodations we need to provide to such individuals.
Interesting. Well, that actually makes sense. And thank you very much, because that clearly brings me to the next question on this particular subject, which is that in your experience and as you see it, how do the evolving legal standards impact
Mhm.
corporate policies on disability inclusion? And really, what do you feel that organizations perhaps could do to kind of stay ahead of these changes?
Sure. So, well, Arjun, initially when RPWD Act came into picture,
Hmm.
the industry thought at broad level was that lot of compliances are only from HR perspective.
So
But
true.
as we are seeing, as the legal standards are evolving, as the jurisprudence around RPWD Act is evolving, and as the proactive community is coming out with asks and specific demands, I personally feel that the RPWD's Act today is not only for HR and part of the corporate India, it has gone way beyond,
Mhm.
right from your infrastructure to your HR to your finance to your awareness generation to your training and development or learning and development uh, to your other policies around insurance benefits, around medical benefits, around POSH, uh, and so on. So, including sensitization of staff, leadership, right from your security guard to your MD, right? Every level there is a need for intervention from RPWD Act perspective. Even your external communication, your internal communication, your social media presence, the language that we use, the way we portray disability, the usage of personal data. I mean, to say whether how many employees with disabilities we have, what types of disabilities we have, can we name the candidate, can we identify their disability in the public domain, or those are the kind of the legal scrutiny. So what if tomorrow there's a case being filed against us and the court or the chief commissioner or the state commissioners ask us for a particular data, and for us to be able to present that data in a meaningful way. I think so from all perspectives, it has really become part of each boardroom conversation, each team's conversation. When we integrate our employees with disabilities into our workforce and day-to-day basis, what measures are we taking, team specific measures, to ensure that the person with disabilities accessibility needs are met, or that or they are actually provided a participation forum where they are treated equally, not just in terms of their respect and dignity, but even in terms of the possibility of them being able to grab the opportunity, right?
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Ramar. Thank you. That was very supremely articulated. And folks in the audience, this is precisely one of the areas before I jump into the next set of dialogues with Amar. These are specifically and precisely the areas that we as SARC work along with wonderful folks such as Amar in helping organizations navigate this journey in a more comprehensive, holistic, and educated manner. So please reach out to us with any questions that you have, and we'd be more than happy to have a dialogue with you and see how we can partner you in getting it right the first time. Amar, coming back to you, I've got a very interesting, you spoke about, let's say somebody needs a particular software or a certain assistive technology.
Mm-hmm.
There's this elephant in the room, which is called reasonable accommodations, Amar.
Yeah.
Uh, how do you legally
Mm-hmm.
define the whole concept of reasonable accommodations, and what constitutes reasonable accommodations under current laws, specifically the RPWA Act of 2016? And
Mm-hmm.
how can organizations therefore ensure that they are somehow meeting these requirements effectively, adequately, and
Mm-hmm.
towards the principle of being equitable?
Sure. Well, honestly, without even going into the legal definition for a moment, Arjun,
Hmm, hmm,
reasonable accommodation actually is not a tough concept to understand. Reasonable accommodation essentially says that whatever modification that I need as an individual on a case to case basis for
hmm.
me to be able to perform at par with others and for me to be able to be treated in a non discriminatory manner is actually reasonable accommodation. The only caveat to this is that the reasonable accommodation should not be so as to put any undue burden on the establishment. Now, undue burden is a very interesting phrase. One could argue that, okay, if you're asking me to spend, let's say, 1 lakh rupees or plus 1 lakh plus, then it might have a burden on my financial position. But when you look at it from an objective criteria perspective, what would you typically look at? You would look at possibly the PAT of the company or the profit after tax, right?
Absolutely.
Or you would look at other financial parameters to determine whether the organization has the wherewithal of being able to meet the reasonable accommodation or not. So
Which
reasonable
is
accommodation,
essentially the point of balancing cost and the practicality of
absolutely,
enabling.
absolutely. Reasonable accommodation does not say at any point that you should compromise with the performance indicators or the key performance indicators or the merit of the candidate. That's not the import of reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation only says that give me what enables me to do better and bring the best out of me, and
And if,
that is very case specific
and
analysis.
if that were to hypothetically, and I speak on behalf of this audience that is also represented by organizations, uh, is that perhaps at a
Mhm.
certain juncture of time, Amar, were to be uh, slightly prohibitive in terms of cost. And I'm
Yeah,
talking about one of those very rare specific cases that do crop up now and then. What, in your judgment or estimate, is the guidance to organizations on how to approach this? Is there a middle way out? Is there a conversation that one should have with the person who is requiring that particular accommodation? How do you suggest organizations go about
sure. So a couple of steps, and I think in this sense, the way US government and US agencies approach procurement and other things from disability perspective is a very good model to look at. So one, of course, you should have a conversation with the candidate concerned, right, as to what the reasonable accommodation requirement is, why is it for, how would it bring efficiency in what you're doing. But that's not enough, right? The other thing that we should do is we should also look at two, three angles. One, what are the potential solutions available for the reasonable accommodation request? Let's say the candidate says, I want X solution. Can we look at X, Y, Z, and out of which we can figure out that, okay, between X, Y, Z, and based on an objective evaluation, we feel that solution Y can also meet the same need. Of course, there may be some nuances to the particular thing for which we are willing to organize, let's say, a training or make sure that the candidate is equipped with the right knowledge. That's one. Second, it's equally important to have a database of partners like Sarthi into the picture where, because many a times we feel that at the company level, let's say an IT request comes and IT person says that, oh, I evaluated two softwares, three softwares, and I found that software C can also do what software A can do. But
it?
since we are not experts in disability related issues and we don't know the kind of problems that people with disabilities encounter or people with specific disabilities encounter, it is very, very important and helpful to have that conversation even with the experts that we have, either as part of our panels or otherwise, whom we can reach out to.
Oh,
Because those
fantastic.
experts are the people who deal in day-to-day basis with many people with disabilities, and they know the inside out of what is actually working well and what is not working well.
No, I
And
couldn't
then,
agree more.
yeah, then
Because I
also,
have a particular analogy that I want to bring to you. This is more anecdotal.
sure.
Hypothetical situation, Amar, is that I have recruited hypothetically somebody in my organization who is a
Mhm,
wheelchair user, therefore an orthopedic
mhm,
disability of sorts. And I
mhm.
have made reasonable arrangements for this person to navigate oneself across the geographical spaces of the company or the office,
Sure,
so to say.
sure.
How now is this reasonable accommodation in some sense, and how would you help me understand how to approach something like this if it were to hypothetically happen? If this person were to join and on day one say, look, not only am I a wheelchair user, but I also need somebody to constantly push me around from one place to the other.
Hmm.
How do you kind of deal with that as an organization?
So again, case-to-case specific questions could be looked at. Arjun, many other factors come into picture, whether you own the premises or whether the premises is leased or co-working premises, what control you have on the third party, if the premises is owned and maintained by a third party, what is the financial position, how much is genuine the request is, what is the frequency within which you have to provide the support. Can we look at alternatives such as electric wheelchair or uh,
Absolutely.
automatic wheelchairs, which would allow automatic maneuvering of the person? Those are the kind of conversations we need to have.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree with you more. Which helps me really move on to, therefore, this whole concept of third party.
Mhm.
Uh, every organization today, Amar, really is working with multiple partners, vendors, clients, one sort or the other.
Yeah.
Uh, what responsibilities, in your view, therefore, do corporations and organizations really have to ensure that third-party vendors and partners also comply with disability inclusion laws? And
Sure.
how can they, more importantly, enforce these standards as is being done within the organization itself?
Sure. So I would say what typically happens when we look at a disability law compliance versus when we look at our own business. There's a way, the way we approach it, the both together is slightly different. When we sell something as a service provider to a business, right? In order to close the contract, we take everything that comes with the contract
Mm,
and we
mm.
promise that we'll do this, that, etc., etc. Whether or not that's a very viable option or not for us. Many organizations do that, especially, and then there becomes a whole gap between what a salesperson commits or what a procurement person commits versus what a compliance person can commit, right? So when we look at fulfilling the needs for our own business and looking at agreeing to contractual clauses uh, in order to close the business,
Mm.
we go with that mindset. But when we look at disability law compliances, we often say, oh, if the third party didn't do, what can I do about it? And that's not a good answer. There are
Okay.
a couple of measures that we can take.
Yeah.
One, we can have these things recorded as part of our contracts with the vendors with timelines in place. Second, there could be SLAs, there could be penal provisions, there could be even within the liability or indemnity when we draft, we look at how we protect ourselves against the measures which the vendor fails to undertake, right? There could be those kind of things. The other more practical aspect of it is to enhance your diversity of the vendors. Bring in vendors with disabilities, bring in suppliers with disabilities. That will really help you enhance the diversity of your that network. And the minute that diversity increases or expands, the disability law compliance start improving. And there are many more measures that can be undertaken, but just in the interest of time, I thought we could touch upon the most important ones.
No, which is absolutely brilliant, really, because it actually brings me to my other question. Is therefore, how do companies and organizations measure the efficacy and the effectiveness uh, of their disability inclusion policies, uh, and therefore look at compliance. Are there pecuniary measures? Are there any other particular specific measures that help the organization enforce these in much better measure than otherwise?
Sure. Well, for us to understand this better, it's important to look at what we call as materiality policy, right? Many companies have something called as materiality policy. That's more in context of financial measures or legal compliance measures. But the two important parameters based on we judge this is qualitative parameters and quantitative parameters, right? So when we look at efficacy or a good implementation of disability inclusion policies, we must assess this at both levels.
Okay.
In terms of quality parameters, could be, for example, awareness generation. How much of my organization culture has been able to become disability inclusive as part of my, I should say, targeted measures that I would have taken to bring in more awareness. Could be sensitization, could be experiential activities, could be surveys done from time to time amongst employees and gather insights to understand the cultural part of the organization. So awareness generation clearly is one qualitative parameter to assess that. Other aspects could be how am I seen internally and externally from disability inclusion perspective? Do people outside within the community of people with disabilities or otherwise know me as an organization which cares about disability inclusion and which is committed to disability inclusion, not just for namesake, but in its reality. That's another qualitative measure. How much diversity I have within my own system and within the systems of the parties that I deal with. So, for example, we often talk of gender diversity today, right? And I've seen companies making specific recommendations to smaller companies or startups that, oh, we are happy to invest in you, but make sure you have one woman on your board of directors, right? Because we want to drive gender diversity. Are we taking similar measures for disability inclusion? Do we have part of our leadership, part of our directors, part of our CFO, CSO, CS, etc., CSO, CIO types of people, the key leadership positions? Do we have people with disabilities, right? That's another qualitative measure. And the quantitative measures could be what potentially the numbers of people with disabilities that we hired, the numbers that we promoted, the growth factor, the career improvements, how many trainings did we conduct, etc. What was the real use or benefit of such measures? It's now not just important to say, oh, 3rd December is coming, which is the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, then let's just do a session. That's not enough.
That's symbolism, of course.
That's symbolism. So if we continue to take such measures and try assessing them both quantitatively and qualitatively, I think we'll be able to assess the efficacy of what we are trying to do.
That's brilliantly put. Thank you so very much for explaining that to us. I have a view on the clock. We've got about 10 odd minutes before we kind of throw this open for questions from the audience. I'm going to come to a very, very important aspect, Amar, which is the whole concept of discrimination. How can organizations really create transparent, equitable recruitment and promotion processes that not only comply with legal standards, but also actively promote disability inclusion? And therefore, in their very fabric and in their very spirit, are non-discriminatory in nature. What's your guidance?
You have touched a very, very sticky part of the conversation. It's very, very, people look at it in a very different manner.
Yeah, indeed they do.
When we talk about promotion of people with disabilities, one thing that people should get absolutely straight and clear in their head is that we are not asking organizations to compromise on the quality or the merit that they want from the candidate, which is to be promoted to the next level. That's not the intent.
True.
But when we do our performance evaluations, there are parameters where we may need to either modify the way we do that evaluation or bring in another set of parameters to compensate for things that the person with disability may or may not be able to do due to the barriers that exist. I won't go anywhere further. I'll give you my own example. I can't read handwritten documents. And there are situations when clients give us comments or the opposite counsels give us comments in a handwritten document.
True.
As if I'm part of a team and if my growth is to be looked at and if I have to be promoted further, then one thing that the company would expect me to do is that I should be able to take the deal ahead independently. But
Fair
with
enough.
that independence, there will be times when I will need that support for the things
So
that
true.
I'm not able to do. In that sense, now one way is that you can hold that thing against me that, oh, this person is not able to do this, hence we are not able to promote the person.
Mm.
But instead of that, are we able to look at that? What if we do something like this? Is the able to a person able to perform? And if it and let's say if that's also not possible, then instead of evaluating X parameter, can we look at Y parameter? Does the concern that the person brings something additional onto the table which others are not able to bring? And it may not just be related to the company, it could also be outside of the company. Let's say the person is very good with the community development. Let's say the
Mm.
person does take up causes which have bigger impact on communities at large. Am I willing to look at those parameters as well when I consider the person's promotion and in that sense become non-discriminatory? I think that's really the way to look at some of these aspects.
It's very interesting that you touched upon this whole concept of, career advancement. If I
Yeah.
were to look at it at the other end of the spectrum, let's look at recruitment, Amar, and this is something that I'd seriously like your nuanced views on, which is
Mhm,
that let us assume there is X position that is open within an organization for hiring, and that has to
mhm,
be filled.
mhm,
I have often, without going into specifics, seen
mhm,
and observed organizations make extra effort and additional efforts
mhm.
to look for a person with disability to fill in a particular role.
Right.
My question, therefore, coming back to the initial segment of our conversation, is that the RPWD Act of 2016 is a beneficial document
Yeah.
to help actively promote the concept of inclusion.
Yeah.
Where, therefore, in all of this, do you see the gap that organizations must bridge so that they are not legally non compliant?
I think the very first gap that I find very often is that there is a huge gap in awareness and understanding and consequently implementation.
True.
Many people say, or many organizations say that we understand disability inclusion very well. Now, I'll give you a very simple example. And again, I'm purposefully giving you blindness specific example because I'm blind and I'm
Of
able to
course, it,
relate,
it becomes so
right?
much more personal. I
Right.
couldn't agree more.
Right. So, for example, people think, okay, Braille is very useful for blind people. And I go and say to an organization, hey, I'm not able to navigate in your environment because there's no indoor navigation facility available. What can we do about it? And let's say the person on the other side who's from the DEI team says, oh, no, no, I understand disability inclusion very well. Let me get you a tactile map in Braille and tactile. Now, that to my mind is not a useful solution because
True.
many people with blindness are not able to perceive shapes, they're not able to perceive tactiles. So sometimes we limit our understanding of disability up to a certain level.
So true.
So opening up ourselves for new and more understanding of the disability inclusion itself can be one way in which we can change our attitudes. And once that is changed, many of things that we see as barriers can actually lead to potential solutions. That's number one.
Mm.
Second thing that I see is that many a times disability inclusion is a very good thing to be talked about at a coffee table or on the drinks table. But when we start our day-to-day life and when we start working in our day-to-day situations, we forget the practical differences that we need to keep in mind when people with disabilities need to be accommodated. It could be as simple as being a little more patient, being a little more empathetic, being a little more receptive, a little more understanding to their needs, and following some of those practices in our day-to-day behavior, in our day-to-day deeds, in our day-to-day actions that reflect the fact that we are not disability inclusive providers just in the organization, but we are even people who care for disability inclusion as persons. So when we put out, for example, our own content onto our own personal social media channel, do we take some effort to make sure that that content is accessible?
So
Do we
true.
make sure that the picture which we are putting out tomorrow on social media has accompanying text that a person with blindness can read? So
Indeed.
that demonstrates the culture of inclusion within our own behaviors. And I think once we start doing that is when we would automatically start thinking each touch point of our organization as to how and what is the missing gap that we need to plug in for a respective touch point to be accessible or inclusive.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And thank you so much for that, because I have one additional question, which is
Sure.
more a practical concept that I'm going to bring to you to understand from you, A, whether it is permissible, B, whether it is logical to do so. For example, when an organization is hiring, is there
Mhm.
anything that bars me from asking, or is there any, or let's assume I'm applying to an X organization. Is there
Mhm.
anything that bars that organization from asking me right at the point of the recruitment process, which is the interview process and so on and so forth, whether I have any visible or invisible disabilities? Um, Number one, is that legally compliant? Are organizations Can organizations do that in order to better understand how they should go about it? And B, uh, how do you kind of deal with this issue perhaps that may
Mhm.
exist, or a perception that if I were to disclose a certain particular disability that may not be overtly visible, I am
Mhm.
somewhere limiting my chances of recruitment. It is a quasi practical, quasi psychological kind of a problem
Sure,
that I'm bringing to you.
sure. So on the first point, Arjun, uh, in fact, organizations should ask for disability of the candidate concerned right at the time of inviting job applications.
All right.
And for a very simple reason that organization needs to provide equal opportunity and reasonable accommodations, right?
Absolutely.
And that reasonable accommodation or equal opportunity starts from the time the person applies to the organization, not after the employment happens, not after the offer of letter offer gets accepted. It actually starts from the very first job application that is put in. But having said that, we should have appropriate safeguards into the system to ensure that the disability of the person remains a confidential parameter,
Hmm.
to ensure that the disability is only disclosed to those many people who have a need to know this, and to ensure that we specifically ask for associated consents that are required under the Information Technology Act or a personal or the PDPP, which is the Personal Digital Data Protection Act, etc., to
Hmm.
ensure that we don't fall foul of the law. So there are many other associated compliances with that ask. Number one. So
Hmm.
definitely, organizations should ask for it, and organizations should accordingly plan and evaluate in terms of what reasonable accommodations or what other measures that we need to undertake to have this person provide a smoother process of uh, pre-employment phase of the
All right.
organization.
Okay.
Right? That's number one. If you could just repeat your second part of the question, sorry,
My
I missed
question
it.
is, there's also the perception within me, hypothetically, that,
Oh
if
yes,
I were to disclose, it may limit
my
my
chances of
my advancement, my chances.
yes. So honestly, it's a very person-driven approach.
Hmm.
If I were you, I would rather, on the face of it, say that, look, I am blind. Because the way I would look at it, that if the organization, after looking at my CV and blindness both, if they have the guts to call me for the interview, means they understand or they are willing to understand me.
So
And
true.
if they want to reject it, then rather that rejection happening at the interview stage or at a later stage, let that happen at there itself. Because it's no point breaking your head against walls, right? You need to go to an environment which understands you and you understand them. So
So
it's a
true.
very person driven choice. Having said that, if there are specific instances where, let's say, a person doesn't disclose and later on, firstly, non disclosure actually enables the organization to say that you actually committed fraud upon us as an
Ah,
organization,
interesting.
right?
Interesting.
So that could be another angle. But forget that. Even otherwise, if you go and later on the organization gets to know, and if you find that after that disclosure, organization has not been attending to me the way they should, definitely the person with disability has a right to go for discrimination related complaints and all. But at an organization level also, the organization is very much within capacity to say that it's a fraud being played upon us, and we did not have the adequate opportunity to address their
For the
concerns
knowledge.
because for the lack of knowledge.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much for bringing this in. And just before I kind of throw this open for questions, Amar, I have my concluding question to you, which is really that when you look at the RPWD Act
Hmm,
and you look at the evolution of disability inclusion within corporate India today,
hmm,
the, the RPWD Act is a living document.
yeah.
Do you see its evolution, therefore, as an act by itself, increasingly going through changes as corporate India progresses and accelerates and expedites its journey towards inclusion transformation as well as disability inclusion? Do you see the act coming up with many more facets and nuances, such as will lead to actually an equitable society in the months to come?
So I would say that the Act is certainly evolving by way of legal standards as far as public facilities and services and employment space is concerned. Act is also evolving in terms of FMCG goods, services, etc.
Right?
Uh, so are the practices, so are the industries evolving, so are the companies evolving in terms of what practices they need to adopt. What is it that that works well? What is it that doesn't work well, etc. And there has been a huge change. I would say since 2000, early 2000s onwards, in
Mm.
terms of onboarding of people with disabilities and the way organizations look at people with disabilities. At least there is increasingly, although at a very slow pace, willingness to welcome people with disabilities and treat them as equals.
No, fantastic. And I, of course, couldn't agree with it more because at Sarasi, both Richa and I, and of course, our wonderful team since 2018, this is pretty much what our organization as well as life mission has been. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen from the audience, that was I, Arjun Vishwanathan, in conversation with Amar Jain. Amar, thank you for a brilliant set of nuances and perspectives that you've brought in from a legal standpoint. I think, collectively are all much the better for having heard you. We've still got about 8 odd minutes, and I welcome anybody from the audience to kindly share any questions that you may have. That any of you could kindly put it on the chat box, and I'd be more than happy to kind of pick any of them up if you had any. Oh, all right. So Dr. Damodaran, if I'm
Mhm.
correct, has said when sharing persons with disabilities candidates profile to clients, is there a need to get explicit consent from the candidate? Since they have posted the profile on Naukri, it can be shared like any other candidate. I, well, you may want to.
So I think if the candidate itself has put in the the profile on, let's say, Naukri.com, etc., where the candidate has disclosed disability, I don't think you really need to take that consent anymore, because then the consent concept itself becomes invalid
All
because
right,
the information is already part of public domain.
I see. Okay. I do want to take this opportunity to mention that we did, from a gentleman by the name of Pratish from Genpact, had sent us in advance a set of 7 questions, of which I think one I have particularly already brought into my conversation with Amar. The other 6 are of various facets and hues. For example, for one of the questions that Pratish has certainly asked is, can you tell us more about the nuances or points we should keep in consideration while dealing with an inclusive workforce during day-to-day operations, which are do's and don'ts? Pratish, before I even take that to Amar, I think it should suffice to mention that, as Amar has already mentioned, different organizations will function differently based on the line of operations that they are in. And therefore, many of the do's and don'ts really will not be a one key fit all kind of a situation. Am I right? There's no one key.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes. There's one from Kavita, if I've got that correct. Are there any special statutory benefits for an employer that employs PWD employees, such as PF exemption, employer contribution, or professional tax? Any
Sure.
pecuniary benefits or otherwise?
So, in the earlier act, there used to be an incentive scheme which also continued after 2016 for some time, where tax benefit on employee contribution was provided up to a certain level
True,
if the
true.
workforce was comprised of 5% and more.
Mm.
There has been talks within the government to have another a proper incentive-based scheme, but as of now, there's no benefit that you can, in terms of pecuniary benefit, that you can avail.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so very much. And I see Pratish has put in a few more questions. Pratish, with your permission, a lot of these are very, very specific, nuanced ones. Please do mail these in to us. You have our email ID. We'd be more than happy to address this separately. Maybe get on a call with you to understand if there's a background to in relation to the questions that you're particularly asking us. And we'd be more than happy to have a session where we could address this for you as well as for your large team, if that were to be the case. But folks, any other questions? Because I do have a view on the clock. We'd like to give everybody maybe a few minutes back of what has promised and really delivered to be a brilliant Friday, so that all of you can set off into the weekend. If there are no questions, Amar, Jain, it has been nothing short of a privilege to have had this conversation with you. And like I said earlier, we are all much the better for having heard you articulate the body of work that you've done, as well as the RPWD Act in such supreme measure. Thank you so very much.
Sure. Arjun, there's one question that I heard just now from Dan. I
Please,
think that's a good question to take up.
please, by all
Uh,
means.
Dan says that are there any specific job in the job postings? Are there any specific disabilities can they be called out? Well, I would say that's a risky call to take because unless you are very sure based on your functional evaluation of the role that only X disabilities can perform, I would think that it's not advisable to take such calls. Uh, it is better to be equal opportunity employer for all disabilities.
So
And
true.
when there are specific functional barriers that a person encounters, we should look for solutions and try to solve it at that level.
Amar, can I just add one more point to what you just mentioned?
Sure.
And I'm so glad that this question came, and I'm so happy that you answered it in accordance. I think what mostly tends to happen is that organizations come from a place of limited understanding and awareness.
Certainly.
And that's the reason why there is specific disability mentioned in the job postings that are made. And I think everything can change and move in the direction of equal opportunity when there is a deeper understanding of how that job post can actually be looked from the filter of whether there is a possibility of the disabilities which are beyond the ones which you obviously think can be mapped to it. So I think that is exactly where perhaps people like Amar, people like us can play a role. And that's exactly what perhaps organizations who are perhaps a part of this webinar, who work in this space, should ideally look at. And we should discourage calling out a disability in a job post for sure.
Thank you, Richa. That was brilliant. So folks like Richa has also mentioned, folks like Amar, folks like Richa and I at Saarthi, along with Shruti and a larger team, this is what we do day in and day out for a living. For any of your queries, for any assistance, for any help, reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to be your partners in acceleration as well as in progress, to navigate this very, very important journey of inclusion transformation and corporate disability inclusion. And on that note, Amar, Jain, thank you so very much. An absolute privilege and a delight.
Absolute pleasure, Arjun. Thank you for having me here.
And folks, so long, stay safe. This is Arjun Vishwanathan from Saarthi signing off. Happy weekend. Have fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.